I love talking to people from all over the community in SC, and nowhere was this more on show than at this weekend's Bar Citizen in Manchester. Turns out that I was RPing as somebody who could still drink, and I'm definitely regretting that decision. But I did have some really good chats there, and it was during one of these with a couple of good-natured piratey types that the subject of the drug wars came up, and it got me thinking a lot about dynamic interactions in the PU. And while I love the effort that CIG put into creating content that brings players together, I do find it pretty funny that it's often as the unintended consequences of tweaks, changes, and dare I say it, bugs, that some of the best interactions end up occurring. In this vid, I want to run with the topic a little bit and talk about why driving player interactions is important, and throw out a few ideas on how it could be taken forward. If that sounds good to you, then grab a cup of tea while I roll the intro, and then let's get into it. First up, I guess let's talk about why this is important. I know that some folks who maybe prefer more of a solo experience might balk a bit at what they perceive as forced player interaction. And let's look the elephant in the room dead in the eyes: forced PvP. So let's start off with a couple of qualifying statements regarding my point of view here. Number one, not all player interactions have to be instances of PvP. A medical rescue beacon leads to a player interaction, and if it's done correctly, or as intended, then it's player helps player, not player versus player. Number two, me saying that I would love to see more of something is not the same as saying I want there to be none of something else. Of course, some player interactions are the violent kind of interactions. I'm not saying that I want there to be no safe space ever for people who aren't interested in that. Realistically, the game is missing systems right now that will create some of these safe zones. So when people beat their chest and declared, "You signed up for PvP the moment you hit play," they're probably right to the extent of right now, but I don't think they're going to be right long term when other systems such as higher security areas, active law enforcement, and maybe harsher prisons than Clasher are actually a thing. Some people just don't like PvP, that's just not how they get their kicks. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and historically MMORPGs that 100% focus on PvP combat are just not that successful, they tend to stay a bit niche. And finally, number three, to me playing solo doesn't mean playing alone. At the end of the day, the only way to 100% avoid player interactions in a game is to play single player games. I've played a number of online games solo, so I do get the appeal of going where you please and doing what you want. Plus it's just a different type of challenge. Surviving in a harsh world without anyone else to fall back on has its own appeal. But there's got to be a reason you're choosing Star Citizen or any other MMO as opposed to one of the many options of single player RPG that you have. I hate to assume it, but the logical answer is the massively multiplayer part of the acronym. And that by far is one of my favourite things about StarCit. Unlike many other games, even many other MMOs, it's one of the few that take the multiplayer aspect really seriously. Ships that physically require someone else to man the stations, the need to reach out to others when you're downed or stranded, and missions that can only be realistically completed if you've got other people with you, unless you're relying on glitches and awful AI that will eventually be fixed before the game goes live. So now for the big issue though, and the key reason I think we need to see more and more development to encourage player interactions. Space. To say Star Citizen is big is an understatement, and right now that's with just one system. The jump between the two most distant planets in Stanton, ArcCorp and Microtech, is 59 million kilometers. But that's just mostly empty, blank, dead space, right? Okay, so just the planet Hurston is roughly 12.5 million square kilometers, or 4.8 million square miles. For context, the island from Ark Survival is 19 square miles, Red Dead 2's entire map is 29 square miles, Los Santos from GTA 5 is just over 30 square miles, and even Final Fantasy 15 has a total map size of only 750 square miles. The only other games which approach or exceed SC scale are other space titles like No Man's Sky and Elite Dangerous. And while both of those have a multiplayer aspect, they do tend to lead with the solo experience a bit more in my experience. So for Star Citizen, the issue is how to get players who have plenty of space to zoom off into to actually come to the same place at the same time to interact with one another. Now this isn't to say that CIG haven't already made some good progress on driving player interactions. I've already used the example of medical beacons, but I'm happy to bring it up again. They're just a great example of an in-game system that has helped massively with the option to ask for a rescue with a simple push of a button. The dynamic events like Siege of Orison, Xenothreat, Ninetales Lockdown and Jumptown have also helped to drive mass groups of players towards a single location, sometimes to help each other, sometimes to fight each other. And as I mentioned, I don't care all that much for everything turning into PvP. I'm glad that some of the events like Ninetales and Jumpdown have an element that pushes aggression between players, while others, Xeno and Siege, don't. It's cool to have different options for different types of players. One thing I would call out at this point is the risk versus reward, that I do think has to govern all aspects of the game. Ninetales Lockdown, for example, has until now not driven a huge amount of players to play the opposing faction. Historically, the rewards on offer for running medical supplies to the besieged station were far higher than anything on offer for those who might want to don their finest Ninetales armour and assist in maintaining the cordon. But with physicalised cargo and soft death now a part of life in the verse, I would expect to see far more players gravitating towards holding up the cargo haulers. It's only once we bring in this risk that the excessive cash rewards on offer start to make sense, and in many ways those rewards are telling you that you're not meant to be going it alone, and you are meant to expect maybe a bit of PvP. Please don't tell me that you can't afford to hire escorts when your C2 is making upwards of 800,000 credits a trip. And when it comes to how to improve things further, to start with I think there's a lot of room to just build on what's already in game. One logical extension I'd really like to see are combat beacons, giving players the ability to send out a distress call if they're waylaid. Part of what I love about the idea of in-game piracy is the potential for encounters that snowball. A few pirates in a Mantis and a couple of combat ships hold up a hauler, making his way between Ariel and Hurston. The trader pushes out a distress call and a group of mercenaries respond, catching the pirates as they try to offload the cargo. The pirates, unwilling to let go of their ill-gotten gains, call in their comrades to fight off the mercs, and so on and so on. It'd be fantastic to catch up afterwards on the story of an entire night of running battles and mass casualties, all over just one caterpillar full of titanium. I think there's also loads of room in-game for further dynamic events covering all types of gameplay. We've had a load of pew-pew events, so how about opening the door to something different? Racing has really been going from strength to strength within the community scene and now with the racing missions. So how about an event that selects a certain track and gives players an hour or two to set their best time, then dishes out rewards based on the best times clocked within that time limit? Not only would we get to compete with one another, but these racetracks would also burst into life all of a sudden, with players hopping there to clock their times. Maybe other enterprising people could ply a trade in recovering wrecks off the track with an SRV or offering refueling. Some might even just show up in their 890 to watch and place a cheeky side wager. While the semi-scripted encounters of the dynamic events are great, for me it's the more fluid moments that have huge value. And the current drug wars triggered by the massive inventories for both buying and selling contraband, and to some extent by the exploits, are a prime example of how moments of imbalance in the economy can drive some players to risk known hotspots and others to come after them. And I highlight the exploits as a driving factor here because, interestingly for me at least, they seem to have blurred the lines a bit on what constitutes piracy. It's interesting to see people who haven't dipped a toe into piratical, criminal playing before, viewing those running drugs as fair game. And I actually think the current situation maybe opens up some potential avenues to explore in the game going forward. I obviously want to see the exploits fixed, that's just part of the game's development. But I'd love to see the potentially huge profits running contraband stay, and inventories that don't present too much of a bottleneck for would-be drug runners. But maybe, logically, drug labs should be located in areas not covered by the commorays, and maybe there could be a mechanic, through scanning the ship and identifying the narcotic cargo, where players hauling drugs could be designated as criminals, allowing others to deal in vigilante justice as opposed to piracy. There could even be the choice for players who wish to remain on the lawful side to turn the contraband into the security services, as opposed to selling it on via the NQA terminals. And for anyone saying, "But I just want a cargo haul," that's absolutely fine. You could cargo haul titanium or laranite or any of the other legal commodities. That way the game's legal system can cover you and you'll be afforded the protection that the system that you're in allows. The additional rewards for running contraband would be there to compensate you for the additional risk that you're taking versus a more legitimate career in trading. And those extra profits also help to pay your cartel members who you'll need to rely on to keep your smuggling operation secure from the increased threat. And I could see this sort of logic extend to other professions as well. For instance, I'm really excited about the salvage missions build for 3.19, where players will be able to buy the locations of wreck sites rather than locating them. But what if certain high-level, highly profitable missions also triggered a counter-mission for other players? Maybe there's been a data leak at the salvage company and some info runner has found out about that wreck too. Both sides would effectively be opting into the potential encounter. Whoever buys the criminal information knows what they're getting themselves into, but so does the salvage crew taking this particular level of high-risk, high-reward contract. And both sides could subsequently prepare accordingly and have a good chance of a rewarding, in credits for one, in gameplay for both encounter. And similarly with the changes to a mining build in 3.19, maybe we'll find more valuable resources such as quant spawning in much more limited locations, making them a place that an org has to go and work to secure before setting about mining and extracting. Or a solo player maybe buzzes in and tries to fly under the radar. But when you set out to hit up that place, you know you're taking a risk. And you know that there are options for you, like going for somewhat less valuable, more widely spread resources, that are going to be less risky. And I know this might not sound particularly appealing to everyone, and I know I'll probably get a couple of comments about how much I hate solo players. But it really just harkens back to what I was saying at the beginning of the video. Not everything in the game has to be for everyone. One of the coolest things about SC is that I can't fully explain to anyone what this game is. It's a space sim, but it's got a bunch of ground vehicles, and FPS levels, and racing tracks, and mining, and trading, and so on. Adding something doesn't necessarily mean taking something away, and I do sincerely hope there will be room in the game for folks who want to just keep their heads down and get on with their own gameplay in, for the most part, peace. But by the same token, that's not what a lot of other people want. Some of us want to play with and against other human beings, because for us, these are some of the most interesting, rewarding aspects of an MMO. And for me personally, a big part of it is the cool stories that come out of getting stuck in with other players. The heroic rescue missions, the arms deal gone sour in the middle of Dead Space, or the minor encounters that snowballed into huge engagements. And yes, when people are taking higher levels of risk, they should probably get paid more, because they do have to hire escorts and they do have to organise and prepare more thoroughly, which in itself takes more time. It's only fair that risk should be balanced by reward. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I really enjoy a little bit of variation to content. Sometimes I like to make detailed guides, but at other times I enjoy just taking an idea like this that came up during a pub conversation and make something like this about it. I very much view these as like a starter for 10 just to get a conversation going. So please feel free to join that conversation either by dropping a comment down below or by hopping on over to Discord. The link for that's just in the video description. And part of the reason we've always been happy to welcome anybody regardless of their playstyle into our Discord is because it sparks interesting debates on the nuances of the game. So whatever your style, you are most welcome. You're also more than welcome to hit the subscribe button if you'd like to keep up with more content, or drop a like if you fancy letting the YouTube overlords know I'm doing a good job. I do also have a Patreon, but just by sticking with me to the end here, you're already doing more than enough. So with all that said, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time.